Good morning, everyone. My name is Dominic Buscall from the Kenhill Estate in West Norfolk. My apologies for not being here today in person. Well, it was my fault. I had a diary clash, which I was unaware of. But my sincere apologies for not being there on the Zoom call today. I'm recording this presentation in advance and really wishing that you have a wonderful day hearing about conservation work going on around the UK and in Norfolk. My role at Kenhill is really, I co-own the farm with my dad, but for a few years now I've been involved as a sort of project manager, helping to set up some of the new and hopefully exciting kind of conservation and farming techniques that we've got going on in place. For those of you who don't know, Kenhill is a farm on the kind of west coast of Norfolk. So this is where we are, on the funny bit which looks back towards the rest of the UK and Lincolnshire. And for, again, those of you who don't know this part of the world too well, we're about 3 hours from London, and quite an agricultural part of the country, but with a rather wonderful kind of coastal strip that goes all the way around from where we are, right the way around North Norfolk. And of course, the fantastic conservation area of the Wash on our doorstep. And I think, the story of Wild Kenhill kind of starts in 2018, which is when I started to first get involved back on the farm. And we like many land managers around the country, were facing kind of two big problems. The first of which was that, and Kenhill had been managed prior to 2018 in a pretty nature friendly manner. So for 30, 40 years, we'd always been in higher tier agri environment schemes. We had pretty good biodiversity on site. When we started the Wild Kenhill project, we had well over 2,500 species already at Kenhill. So we knew we were holding on to our own biodiversity pretty well, but it was, in a way, it's a managed retreat. And we weren't really comfortable with that at all. And obviously, when you look around and you see the kind of statistics we see in the State of Nature report, and globally, we are obviously in a huge biodiversity crisis, and the same can be said of the climate. And my dad and I both had a pretty long-standing interest in the environment and climate change, and we wanted to do more on that front. As the bottom line, we wanted to not just manage our land to look after what we've got, but actually to try and be an exemplar nationally for what kind of good land management looks like, progressive land management, and land management which is there not just producing food, which is important, but producing an array of public goods. So that was kind of part of the motivation. And the left-hand side chart kind of shows you what's happened to a number of what they call priority species in the UK since 1970, so around a 60% decline, which I think is quite shocking. So that was a real motivation in the beginning of this project. The other thing, so that's the environmental. The other thing is the commercial side. As you know, Brexit is causing a fundamental change in the policy environment in agriculture and in the environment, and in particular for farmers. We're moving from an environment where we were subsidised by the EU, who spend about a third of their budget on payments to farmers for farming to allow them to be competitive in a global marketplace, to a UK based system, not managed by Europe, but by the UK government itself, which is going to be much less money distributed to farmers, but also distributed on a very different philosophy. So the philosophy of public money for public goods, rather than the common agricultural payment in the EU, which was money was just distributed based on how much area you farmed. So you got a per hectare payment. That was all going to change. And the right-hand chart there, that kind of shows you what we expected to happen to our the EU subsidies we were going to receive. So you can see this is the first year, 2021, where we start to take a real hit, as it were, getting less and less money over time. And I think our assumption was that, it wouldn't be sensible to rely on the UK government coming up with anything particularly lucrative. And I think that's kind of been validated because progress is pretty slow, and we still don't know what the world will look like post 2024 for farmers in terms of policy. So we realize that we're going to have this big shortfall in our business, the farm business, and that's okay for someone like Ken Hill. Ken Hill's a reasonably big farm. It's 4,000 acre holding, but 42% of farms in the UK by number don't make money without this common agricultural policy. So we're going to see a huge shift in the activities and the way that we farm in the UK because of that. At Ken Hill, we do make money without the common agricultural policy, without single farm payment. But farming is very volatile. And when you get a bad farm year, so, like last year where we had 30 to 40% drop in yields because it was dry, and let's say also commodity prices, which is all of your inputs and outputs, go against you, we at Ken Hill, we would have lost money without the single farm payment. So we knew that there was, a real commercial challenge going on, as well as wanting to do more for the environment. And I think actually those dual kind of problems we thought we could kind of address with a radical response and a radical change in the way that we were managing the farm and estate. And what we embarked upon is kind of what we call the Wild Ken Hill project, and it's principally comprised of this 3-prong approach. Okay, and those prongs, they're really just land management tools. They're land uses that we apply to different parts of Ken Hill. Okay, now starting inland, and there's kind of a logic to why we do this. So starting inland, we have kind of where our good soils are, right? Slightly more fertile, a bit less sandy, a bit more chalky. And these are basically good for growing food. So our kind of approach is that, well, on land which is good for growing food, and we need to grow food, that's important. We need to have food security. Let's employ regenerative agriculture as our principal land use. And regenerative agriculture, I'll come back to. It's a style of farming which isn't just focused on, a yield. It is focused on that, but it's also focused on your soil health. That's an equally important kind of KPI for a regenerative farmer. And actually that delivers a variety of benefits alongside the food production, right? So we see carbon sequestration, we see biodiversity, we see climate resilience, all being built up because of that style of farming, which I'll come back to. So that's why we're doing that there. It's good soils, we think, predominantly should be farmed because we need to eat. Then coming further towards the coast, we have our rewilding area. And I think rewilding is kind of what we've become best known for, but it's not the only thing we do. And what we're trying to show with our rewilding project is how we think it should fit in to the UK landscape. Rewilding, I don't think is something that could be done anywhere or everywhere. It has a place, and for us, we think that's kind of marginal farmland, right? And that's what we've done at Ken Hill. So the rewilding area is kind of comprised of 2 former land uses. One was arable farming, in a kind of nature-friendly arable farming, but on very poor sandy soils. So these soils where we were not generating much of a yield, just about making money in the black, but not by much at all. But to do that, we had to do, really what I would describe as quite a lot of environmental damage along the way. So applying quite a lot of chemical inputs, more so than elsewhere, because the soil was poor, to generate that yield. And what we were actually finding is that the soils were getting pretty degraded, and we were getting weeds becoming resistant to particular herbicides and so forth. You're kind of stuck in this awful cycle, and we just thought that's not the way forward. Instead, we can provide a variety of public goods, and that we know that's the direction of travel. So we know that's going to stand us in good stead in the future, through a land use called rewilding. And really what we're doing is we're just stepping back, and we've almost left that farmland completely. I'll come back to that, but we've almost left it. And we think that marginal farmland is much better served, doing carbon sequestration and growing biodiversity and providing like green space for people, rather than farming food for quite a poor yield. So we think that's a better use of that sort of type of soil, that marginal soil. We've also got a large area of woodland inside the rewilding area. And there the land use change is a bit more subtle. It's kind of going from a semi-commercial kind of woodland management to a much more naturalistic woodland management, where we do a bit of intervention at the beginning and then we step away and let that kind of revert to a more kind of wood pasture type environment. And that hopefully will happen because we'll have grazing animals actually moving through the woodland for the first time in other than the wild deer for a very, very long time. Now, the third tool we kind of use is what I call traditional conservation. And we use that there across the sort of freshwater marshes and coastal scrub that goes right up to the wash. And I guess the reason that's not in the rewilding areas is because, like many nature reserves up and down the UK, we had a lot of existing high quality species use, rare species use in that area. And actually a rewilding approach can be quite damaging. So when you have a maybe quite a fragile ecosystem that's on quite a small area, to maintain that system, you probably are going to need a degree of human intervention. I mean, that's why we have so much active management going on up and down our nature reserves, right? Because without that, they might disintegrate. We don't have that scale and that connectivity for these systems to work on their own. And that was true of our freshwater marshes as well. So the wonderful habitat for wading birds, wildfowl and so forth. And that really required us to take a much more active approach. So rewilding is passive and low intervention. Traditional conservation, in my mind, is active and high intervention. And the other key difference is that rewilding is very process focused. So in the rewilding area, we don't get too hung up about, what the outcomes are going to be. What we get hung up about is making sure the right natural processes are in place, the right grazing, the right keystone species, and so forth. Traditional conservation, it's less about processes, about outcomes. So there we're very focused about the number of breeding pairs and breeding success rates of particular wading birds. So again, it's a different philosophy, and that's why we reckon it's really a different land use tool. We also have a little bit of again traditional conservation up on this river valley here on the River Heacham, which is an old chalk stream where we kind of make sure we manage the valley around there in a bit more of an active way. So I hope that kind of makes sense as to why we use each tool on each type of area, right? So rewilding, I mean, what does that actually look like for a land manager who's doing some? So I won't dwell on this for too long, but there's a few things that we've been doing in the last 2 or 3 years, and a lot of it's behind the scenes to actually get a rewilding project up and running. So we've got 1,000 acres of rewilding, which we're not really familiar with that. So what do you do? Well, the first thing we found ourselves doing was really understanding the ecology of our site, and not something we'd had to do too much before, to be honest. And that's super important because that tells you as the manager of this new rewilding kind of thing, how many grazing animals to get, which ones, when to put them in, how to monitor the site going forward. What's the hydrology doing? So, where would it make sense, for example, to put in some, to re-wet some areas right at the beginning of the project. So when you step back, the processes are in place for it to look after itself. And where should we put in beavers? Are there any other keystone species that would be really a good idea to reintroduce back into this system to help kind of kickstart those processes again? So that was quite a big bit of thing, and that flows through to all of your other kind of decisions and choices that you need to make around the site. So as I said, we've now got actually that note's a little bit wrong because we now have all of the grazing animals on site. So we have about 35 head of red poll cattle, 20 Exmoor ponies and 4 Tamworth pigs, all there to bring different natural processes with them into the rewilding mix. So anything from, you know, the basic grazing, but also nutrient cycling through the dung, carrying seeds around on their fur, soil disturbance, and all these important processes these grazing animals are now bringing, and they're free to roam across that 1,000 acres. So it's quite interesting to see their behaviours. We've also then got species reintroduction. So I think that the most important one really is the beavers that we now have at Kenhill, 2 pairs in an enclosure, because while we're looking at other things, that's the one which is most, you know, keystone species. So that's the one which is it's not just about having the beavers themselves, it's about the array of impacts they're going to have on their own habitat and ecosystem, and hopefully helping to deliver biodiversity boosts across their enclosure. So we've already started, and I'll come back, we've already started to see some quite interesting impacts. Then there's a variety of other bits and bobs. So we make sure we control our grazing animals. We needed to put some fencing around the edge, and that meant a degree of public engagement too. We've stopped a lot of practices. So that's one of the great things about rewilding, is that actually it gives you a lot of time and cost back as a land manager. So, you know, no more commercial forestry, no more hedge trimming, gradually phasing out pest control and so forth. So all of these things, and it's not just flicking a switch. You do need to kind of, when you go from a managed to a very unmanaged system, you need to take them out gradually. But all of those things you can stop, and that's great. Then done lots of work with the community and with different organizations and both kind of NGOs and academic and so forth. And then I think critically also research and monitoring is just so important, because if we are ever to demonstrate the success or failure of what we're doing, then we need to have really, really good comprehensive data about the change. And of course, as farmers, that's not something we've really, you know, been paying much attention to before. So all the surveying we've done before was pretty informal. So we really got our heads around doing some interesting stuff in, you know, that could be repeated over time in invertebrates, a lot of variety of different surveys in birds, lots on vegetation, and we do a lot of aerial work with the drone and also fixed point photography, and that's all designed to track changes over time and to give us feedback as the managers as to whether things are working or not. So, you know, is the grazing intensity too high? It's like a classic thing that we're always trying to work out from those sorts of studies. And this is kind of how it's beginning to look on the ground. So these stubbles here, that's year 1. So they've already dramatically changed, and they've gone, I mean, there is some stubble persists, and we do have some volunteer kind of cash crops. There's still some volunteer barley and wheat plants kicking around, but really now it's just a sea of kind of arable plants and weeds. And also we're seeing, and this is a ash sapling, a lot of natural regeneration going on. So because, you know, half of our rewilding area is woodland, and then you've got all the old hedgerows as well, which were pretty well managed, there's a lot of source vegetation in there. So I think the natural regeneration with the proliferation of trees and scrubby species will be quite quick. And this particular ash sapling, which we saw, that would have been September, October, 40 meters from the nearest tree, so nearest possible parent tree. So it's quite exciting seeing that happen, coming up through the stubble. And then of course we've got this is just one of hundreds and hundreds of kind of rootled areas that the Tamworth pigs have gone and done. And as you know, that disturbance will, in this coming spring, all the disturbance they've done since they arrived in October, those areas will regenerate much quicker. And so it'll be quite exciting to see that. The other cool thing about the soil disturbance is when I was up there, when we had that big patch of snow in Feb, and the soil they turned over was obviously much warmer and it wasn't frozen, and all the songbirds were coming in to sort of feed and hang out on that disturbance. So it's just a really nice example of how the presence of these kind of basically with wild herbivores really is kickstarting the system. Of course, we've got the beavers too, where some damming has started to happen. We've seen basically rises in the water level throughout the system that they're working in. That's a sort of a man-made kind of drainage system in a woodland. That the area they're in used to be called, on old maps like Faden's map, the fen. So we know it used to be a lot more open and wet, and that's what they're kind of working on now for us. So they're building these dams, they're coppicing all the poplar, they've taken a variety of young sycamores down, and really looking forward to seeing that evolve over time. I think it will be quite slow because it's a big area. They've got 50 acres, but just a bit wetter and a bit more open. And these are some of the early signs of what they've been up to. Then in the area of traditional conservation, so I said this is a much more active management approach for us. And actually in 2019 at the back end, we did a pretty significant project to raise the water levels there by about 1 foot. And so you can see us here in with the diggers, and subsequently we managed the water levels on our gauge boards pretty intensively. So we're often monitoring and fiddling with those. The same is true with the grazing pressure. So we're trying to get that sward just right for particular wading bird species. So you can see how that's a lot more in high cost, high time approach to conservation than the rewilding, where in effect we have put some wild herbivores in and then we've stepped back and not done much. And it's been wonderful to see the early results from that rise of the water levels. And there's a nice quote from some of the surveying we did in 2020, which we're shortly to be replicating this spring. Then there's the third tool, which is regenerative agriculture. So it's important, I think, to dwell on this briefly, because regenerative agriculture is, in my mind, equally as powerful a tool as rewilding for this country in this context. We farm 70% of the surface area in the UK. So yes, probably some of that, the marginal land could be given over to, things like rewilding and other land uses. But we're always going to have quite a high percentage, I think. Even if 5% was given over, 10% would be masses. There's still going to be 60% of our surface area farmed. And so it's really important that we farm that in the right way. And I think that regenerative farming is got to be the way forward for vast areas of that land. And the reason being, alongside food production, you can achieve a variety of benefits, right? So you put in place these principles, and that there's a lot of sort of, like all these things, debate around the definition, but broadly speaking, you need to be operating a series of principles in the way you farm. And there's things like minimizing soil disturbance, integrating livestock, making sure you always have a living root. So all of these things are there to boost soil health. And when you do that and you get the soil right, we just see this array of really important benefits. So, front of mind is carbon sequestration. So we can store carbon in agricultural soils. A lot of people don't think we can, but you absolutely can. And you can do it, on the right soil, you can store a lot. And if everyone was doing this, we'd be storing millions of tons of carbon in the UK. And it's quite meaningful in the path to net zero. We've got better soil, better water retention in the soil, right? So that means you've got less runoff, you've got lower flood risk, but also you've got the soil holding the water better, so that when you have drier periods, later in the year or whatever, or I think we should expect to have drier periods, you actually got resilience to climate change, right? So your crops, and this is already starting to happen for us, we did better than the national average last year because we were holding onto our water better. So when it was very dry, we didn't quite see such a bad decrease in the yield. Still went down, but it wasn't as bad as everyone else. Then soil health, that basically means fertility. Soil's healthy, it's more fertile. And so I think one of the ways we actually deliver food security, it's not by farming more intensively, it's by farming more regeneratively. And if we do that, then you actually get soils which you can still be growing good amounts of food in 30, 50 and 100 years from now. I don't think we can keep degrading our soils forever and ever. I think that's a road to nowhere. And then the final thing is of course the biodiversity we get on our farmland. So I think we all know the rewilding area is going to turbocharge biodiversity. There's some 2,500 species in that rewilding area alone, and it's got this huge variety of habitats, and we think it's going to go crazy being left to nature. But what we also see on our farmland with the new style is also very cool. So incredible density of hares and farmland birds, really interesting assemblages of invertebrates and arable plants. And that all means we're then getting, we have swifts, bombing over our oilseed rape fields because, no insecticide has been applied. So it's buzzing with inverts. And that's usually something. We've got heaps of kestrels and everything else, goshawks, small mammals that are there for prey items. So it's really exciting what we can achieve there. It's different to rewilding, but also I think really powerful from a biodiversity perspective, and that's just going to be so important, I think, in terms of connecting up the existing nature reserves and new nature reserves that we're going to have in the UK. You can't just have them all isolated. We need these buffer zones of organic and regenerative farming in between that can provide those kind of highways down the margins and hedgerows between those nature reserves. And I guess this is what our farmland looks like. I won't take you through all of the different techniques we're doing, but you can just see like how much more nectar availability, how many more invertebrates we're going to have, and that's beneficial not only for biodiversity, also for the farm. So we have much better natural pest management. So we don't need to apply so much in the way of pesticide because we have wonderful ladybird populations hoovering up all the aphids for us. So it's an example of how working with nature, we think we're actually going to be better off than working against it. Finally, kind of that's what we've done so far. What are we up to next? So there's lots of stuff we're doing in terms of connectivity. So I'm working at the moment on something on the River Heacham, where we hopefully will collaborate with other landowners. But we also, there's on the left-hand map there's 2 other rewilding projects within quite close proximity. We're talking to a lot, sharing learnings. There's organic farming at Sandringham, that's the dot near Dersingham, and another farm up in Burnham Deepdale there, you can see where we're doing a lot of knowledge sharing because they've taken a lot of land out of production, going into stewardship and into organic farming as well. So what we're doing is we're working a lot with our neighbours to try and create that lattice of kind of connected habitat, and that's what the John Lawton report is asked for. That's what we want: more habitat, better connected, and at greater scale. So I think it's really important. We want to see, regenerative farming and rewilding and traditional conservation approaches spread across Norfolk, particularly in areas where the farmland is not as good for growing food. Some of you also may know we brought forward proposals earlier in the year to reintroduce white-tailed eagles and bring them back to the east of England. That consultation process is now finished, and we've submitted our report to Natural England for them to assess the feasibility and whether they might award us a license. Consultation was hugely positive, with 91% of about 1,800 responses, coming in support of the proposals, and we had actually really good support among land managers and some of the interests you might not assume would get behind this sort of proposal. So we're really hoping that goes ahead, and I think it would just be, another wonderful thing to do to bring back this sort of iconic, the UK's largest bird of prey back to its former range, helping to connect up kind of those meta populations we have in Ireland and Scotland and the Isle of Wight with the continent, and just a flagship species back in our coastal systems. That can only be good for the overall conservation movement, in my mind. So that's also hugely exciting. So you can keep in touch with us. We're on all social media. We've got a website, newsletter, and we're very open book with our approach. We have lots of people on site to come and see what we're doing. We share all our findings online. So do come and engage with us beyond today, hear a bit more about what's happening and whether we get that license for the eagles and so forth. We're very much like a platform, so we need to tell our story, and that's how we think we can have an impact. So do come and engage. I think I'm running up to time, so thank you very much again for the opportunity to talk and to tell you a bit about our project. I apologise for not being there myself again, but hugely grateful for the opportunity, and wishing you all the very best.